If this story keeps you listening, subscribe and tell me what horror story I should tell next.
There is no saga of Modderheimer. You will not find it in the Landnámabók. You will not find it in the Chronicles of the Jarls. You will not find its name spoken in any hall between here and the Kattegat, because there is no one left who remembers it, who is willing to say it. And I am the last of those. And I have been silent for 60 years. There were 47 of us. There was a Jarl named Hrafnkel, who was a good man in the way men are good when they have not yet been asked the wrong question. There was a Godi named Orn, who was less good, though I do not think he deserved what happened to him. No one deserves what happened to him. There was a palisade of green pine, which is a poor wood for a wall, and a longhouse with a hearth that drew badly, and a byre with 11 sheep in the 4th winter, and a smokehouse the size of a small hut, and a loom in a small room I sat at from first light to last for 4 years. None of this is in any book. None of this has a stone. If you walked into the valley tomorrow, and you will not, no one walks into that valley, you would find nothing but a slope of alder and the shape of an old fence line under the moss, and you would not know 47 people had lived there. There is a reason the sagas do not tell this story. The reason is not that the story was forgotten. The reason is that the 4 other people who walked out of Modderheimer with me could not put it into words, and neither could I. And words are the only material a saga is made from. What happened at Modderheimer was the wrong shape for a poem. I'm going to try to tell it anyway. I'm going to fail. But the failure will still contain more of the truth than the silence has. I have a small thing in the pocket of my apron. I have carried it for 60 years. I will show it to you before you leave, and I will tell you what it is, and I will tell you why I still carry it, though I have long since stopped believing it does anything at all. But first, I have to tell you about the valley, and the man who would not cross into it, and the word he said once, at the base of a red stone, in the autumn of the year we came. I was 42 years old the autumn we came north. My second husband, Eyvindr, was a good man and a stupid one, which is a combination I have since come to believe is more common than either of the 2 qualities alone. He had heard from a trader in Nidaros that there was open land 4 days' walk inland, a valley with a river running down from a mountain, timber enough for a settlement of 50, and no other Norse within 30 miles. He had heard this, and he had believed it. And he had come home to me with the shine of it in his face. And I had said yes because I had already buried 1 husband and 2 daughters, and I no longer had the strength to say no to a man who was still capable of shining. There were 47 of us in the original party, 21 men, 17 women, 9 children. Jarl Hrafnkel was our leader. Though he was not yet called Jarl, then he was called Hrafnkel Ketilsson, and he was 36 years old, and he had the kind of quiet competence that made men look at him twice and then follow him without being asked. His wife Gyda was with us, and their son Beinir, who was 6. Orn came with us as our Godi, our priest, because a settlement without a man who knew the rights was a settlement that would not last a winter. And Orn had been trained by his father, who had been trained by his father, and he knew every invocation from the naming of a child to the burning of a boat. We hired 3 Sámi guides at Nidaros. I do not know their names. This is a shame I have carried alongside the larger one, because a person who does not know the name of the man who tried to save her life has failed at something basic to being a person. But I did not know then that he was trying to save my life. And I did not ask. And by the time I understood, I would have wanted to know. He was 6 days' walk south of me, and I would never see him again. The lead guide was an old man. I would guess 60, though the Sámi wear their age differently than we do. The cold weathers them the way it weathers a piece of driftwood, into something harder and lighter than what they began as. He had a face that had been carved by wind into a small number of clean lines. And he did not smile. And he did not speak our tongue except in the specific words he needed to move a sled and take payment. He led us 4 days north from Nidaros, up through pine country, and then into birch country. And then, on the 5th day, we came to the mouth of the valley. You should try to picture it, because it is a specific shape, and the shape mattered. The valley opened north to south. Its mouth was narrow, perhaps 200 paces wide, with steep spruce-covered ridges rising on either side. A river came down out of the mouth and turned west toward the sea. Beyond the mouth, the valley opened into a broader bowl, 6 miles long, floored in alder and low willow, with a mountain at its head. The mountain was called Moder in our tongue, which means mother, though we did not name it that. The Sámi had, in their own tongue, and the trader in Nidaros had translated the name for us, and we had adopted it without thinking. It is easy, in a language you're still building, to adopt a word for a thing before you have understood what the word means. We would do this again. We would do this many times. At the mouth of the valley, on the eastern side, there was a single pine tree, older than the others around it, with a red stone the size of a man's head at its base. The stone had been placed. It had not fallen there. You could see the way the moss had grown around it and up its sides, but not underneath. Someone had set it there, generations ago. And no one had moved it, and no one had let the moss cover it either. Our lead guide stopped his sled at that pine. He got down. He walked to the red stone. He touched it once, with 2 fingers, the way a man touches the door of a house he is about to enter, asking permission, not announcing himself. Then he stood up, and he turned to Hrafnkel, and he said one word. He said Itnu. He said it low, and he said it once, and he did not repeat it, though Hrafnkel asked him to. Then he turned his sled around. The other 2 guides, younger men, his sons perhaps, I never learned, turned theirs. They did not look at us. They did not accept the second half of their payment, though Hrafnkel followed them 100 paces down the trail with the silver in his hand. The old man said one more thing, over his shoulder, without turning a longer phrase this time, in Sámi, of which I understood nothing. And then all 3 of them were gone into the trees, and the sound of their sleds faded, and we stood at the mouth of the valley with our packs on our backs and our own children by the hand. And we laughed. That is what I want you to remember. We laughed. Eyvindur laughed. Hrafnkel did not laugh, because he was not a man who laughed at other men's fear, but he smiled the small, tight smile of a leader who has just been given a story. He can use the story of the Sámi guide who fled at the valley's mouth, which he would tell in the hall on winter nights, and which would grow in the telling until in the 2nd year it would become the story of a man who had wet himself. And in the 3rd year it would become the story of a man who had begged us to turn back and been shamed. And in the 4th year Hrafnkel had stopped telling it, because he had begun, I think, to suspect it was not the story he had thought it was. But that night we were still in the first telling of it, and the men laughed, and the children ran ahead into the valley, and we walked 6 miles up the river to a bend where the alder gave way to a flat meadow, and we made our camp. And by the end of the 2nd week, we had felled enough timber to begin the palisade. I have thought about that word for 60 years. Iatnu. I have said it in my own mouth, in private, more times than I can count. The scholars now write it, Iatnu, and translate it as river, or sometimes mother river. And they think that is enough. They are wrong. It is a word with a rule attached to it, and the rule is what matters, and the rule is that you do not say it twice in the same hour. The scholars do not know the rule. I did not know it either, in the autumn of 869, when I heard the old man say it once, and I did not think to ask why he did not say it again. I would learn the rule 4 years later, on the 5th day of the last week of the settlement, from a woman named Eile, who was old enough to be the guide's mother, though she was not. I will tell you what she told me when I come to it. For now, I want you to hold 2 things in your mind. The first is that the valley we settled in was called Moderheimer, the home of the mother, and we did not know what we had named it. The second is that a man who had walked those hills all his life turned around at the mouth of it and would not go further for silver. And we, who had been in the country for 4 days, walked past him laughing. Everything else follows from those 2 things. I want to tell you first about the dogs, because the dogs are how it began. We had 4 dogs at Moderheimer in the 4th winter. 3 were working dogs, long-legged, thick-coated, the sort that will herd a sheep and sleep in the byre and fight a wolf if a wolf comes. The 4th was a small yellow bitch named Hunas that belonged to Gita, the Jarl's wife. She was a house dog, useless for work, and she slept by the hearth in the longhouse, and no one minded because Gita loved her, and because she was, on balance, a pleasant thing in a settlement of hard people. On the 3rd night of the 3rd month of the 4th winter, all 4 dogs stopped going near the northern palisade. I noticed it before anyone else. This is not because I was more observant than anyone else. It is because I fed them. I fed them at first light and again at dusk. And my feeding place was on the north side of the longhouse, and the dogs would come when I called. On the 3rd night of the 3rd month, they did not come. I called twice. They came the 2nd time, but they came from the south, around the longhouse, the long way, and they would not follow me back to the feeding place. I set the bowls down where they were standing. They ate there. Nos, the little one, ate with her back to the northern wall and her ears flat against her skull. I told Gita. Gita told Hrafnkel. Hrafnkel walked the northern palisade that afternoon with a spear and found nothing, no tracks in the fresh snow, no scat, no smell of anything. He came back and told the men at supper that it was probably a lynx we had not seen, or perhaps a bear that had not properly denned, and that the dogs would settle. The men nodded and went back to their bread. Orn, our goatee, said nothing at the meal. But afterward he came to me in the loom room and asked me to repeat what I had noticed, in detail, and I did. He listened. Then he said, "Freyr is warning us. There will be a hard cold. We will make a small offering." I did not answer him. I was not a woman who argued with the goatee, because a woman without a husband and without sons has no ground to stand on when she argues with a goatee. And Orn was not a cruel man, but he was a man who took correction personally. I had learned in 4 years to nod, and to keep my hands moving on the loom, and to say the small, polite things a widow says to a priest so that he continues to think of her as a woman of good sense. But I want to tell you what I thought, because it matters for what comes later. I thought, the dogs are not warning us of cold. The dogs know cold. The dogs have lived through 3 winters here. The dogs are warning us of something they have never smelled before. I did not say it, but I want you to know I thought it, in the 3rd month of the 4th winter, 6 weeks before the palisade fell. I want you to know I was not a woman who was surprised by any of what came. I was a woman who was slow to speak and who watched, and who had already lost enough to know that when the small, warm creatures who share your fire begin to press themselves against the wrong wall, you should pay attention. Moderheimer in the 4th winter was by any measure a Norse settler would recognize a successful settlement. We had the palisade green pine, poorly seasoned but standing. We had the longhouse, with its badly drawing hearth, warm enough. We had the byre, with 11 sheep and 2 goats and a milking cow that had come with us as a calf and grown into a good milker. We had the smokehouse, half full of venison and salt fish. We had a stockade of firewood taller than a man. We had 6 children under the age of 12, 4 of them born in the valley. We had a working forge, a working mill, and a small trading arrangement with a coastal Norse settlement. 2 days' walk to the West Firs south, iron and grain north, twice a year. We had, in short, everything a settlement needs to survive a winter. We had done what our fathers had done. We had done it well. I sat at my loom in the loom room, which was a small partitioned space at the northern end of the longhouse, and I wove cloth for trade, and I listened to the settlement move around me. I could tell you who was in the courtyard by the sound of their footsteps. I could tell you when the smith stopped his hammer to drink water. I could tell you when Gitta was scolding Bainir, and when she was only pretending to. I heard everything, and I said nothing, because that is what a widow does in a longhouse full of other people's marriages. Which is why I heard, on the 4th night of the 3rd month, Hrafnkel and Orn talking in the main hall, on the other side of the loom room wall. Orn said, "The dogs will not go north." Hrafnkel said, "I know, I walked it. There is nothing." Orn said, "There is something the dogs know that we do not." There was a pause. Then Hrafnkel said, "Then tell me what it is, priest." Orn did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was lower, and I had to still my loom to hear it. He said, "I do not yet know. I will make an offering at the northern gate tomorrow at dusk. A ram." Hrafnkel said, "A ram is too much." Orn said, "A ram is what I will offer." There was another pause, longer this time. Then Hrafnkel said, in the voice of a man conceding a small point to keep a larger piece, "Then offer it." I heard him stand up. I heard him leave the hall. I heard Orn sit for a long time by the hearth. And I heard him do something I had never heard him do before he prayed, quietly, in the old style, not the public style he used in the hall on feast days, but the private style of a man asking rather than performing. I could not make out the words, but I could hear the shape of them. And the shape was not the shape of Freyr's warning about cold. The shape was the shape of a man asking a much older question and hoping he had the right God to ask it of. The first sheep went missing that same night. Sven the shepherd found the sheep gone at first light. There should have been 11. There were 10. The pen was closed and latched. The latch had not been broken. The gate had not been forced. The fence was intact. There was no blood on the snow inside the pen, and no blood on the snow outside the pen. And there was no wool caught on the wood of the gate, which there would have been if a wolf had dragged a sheep over it. And there was no drag mark in the snow at all, which there would have been if anything had dragged a sheep anywhere. The sheep was simply not there. Svein came into the longhouse before the fire was well up, which was against his habit. And he told Hrafnkel. Hrafnkel went out with him. Orn went out. 6 of the men went out. Eyvinder, my husband, did not go out, because Eyvinder was already dead by then. He had died in the first winter of a chest illness, and I had buried him behind the longhouse. And I had continued to wake up in a bed that was too large for me for 3 years. And this is not part of the story, except that I want you to understand I was not a woman with anyone to speak for me. And everything I saw at Moderheimer, I saw as a person standing slightly to the side of the settlement rather than inside it. I did not go with the men to look at the pen. I heard them come back. I heard the specific quality of their silence when they came back. which is a thing you learn to recognize after enough years of listening from the loom room. They had found tracks. Not at the pen. The pen had no tracks. The tracks were 40 paces north of the palisade, in the fresh snow of the meadow. And they came down from the direction of the mountain. And they stopped. They did not turn around and go back. They did not continue on toward the palisade. They came out of the snow-covered meadow, walked in a straight line for perhaps 30 paces toward the settlement, and then ended. The men could not agree on what had made them. Ketil the smith said bear. Ketil had killed a bear in Sweden as a young man, and considered himself an authority. But he said this with less certainty than he usually said such things, because the tracks were not bear-shaped. They were wider. The pad was wrong. There were 5 toes, which is correct for a bear, but the arrangement was wrong. The toes were placed as if the foot had been longer than it should have been, and the claws had left marks deeper than any bear claw Ketil had ever seen. He said all this, and then he said again, more quietly, "It is a bear, a large one, an old one." Gunnar the hunter said no. Gunnar had trapped every animal that walked in northern country, and he said it was not any animal he knew. He would not name it. He said, "The track is wrong at the heel. The weight is in the wrong place. This thing did not walk the way a walking thing walks." Hrafnkel listened to both of them and made no ruling. This was his way to hear each man and then withhold. He walked the tracks himself twice, and then he came back to the settlement, and at midday he called the men together in the hall, and he said, "Something has taken a sheep. We do not know what. We will double the watch tonight. Orn will make his offering at dusk, as he intended. And tomorrow, if nothing comes, we will forget this. And if something comes, we will meet it." The men nodded. It was a good speech. It was the speech of a jarl who was being careful without being fearful, which is the hardest speech a leader can give. And Hrafnkel gave it well. I heard all of this from the loom room. I want to tell you also what I heard from Gunnar afterward, because it is the peace that mattered. Gunnar came into the longhouse after the meeting to warm his hands at the hearth. He was alone. He did not know I was in the loom room, because I had let the fire in there go low, and there was no light coming from behind the partition. And I had stilled the loom. He said out loud, to no one to himself, or perhaps to a god he was not sure he still believed in, he said, "They did not stop walking. They stopped needing to." He stood at the hearth for another minute. Then he went back out into the cold. I sat at the loom for a long time after that. I did not fully understand what he had meant. I would not fully understand it for 3 more days. But I understood enough to know it was the true sentence, and everything else that had been said in the hall that morning was the sentence men say when they are trying to keep a settlement calm. At dusk, Orn made his offering. He led a ram to the northern gate. The northern gate opened out onto the meadow, toward the mountain, and he tied the ram to a post that had been driven into the ground for this purpose. He performed the invocation. It was a long one. I stood at the loom room door with my shawl over my shoulders, and I could hear him from where he stood, though I could not see him. The wind was from the north, and it carried his voice down the length of the settlement, and I heard every word. He called on Freyr. He called on Thor. He called on the old names Njordur, Uller. The names men do not much use anymore. He was covering ground. He did not know which god the offering needed to reach, and he was casting his voice as wide as he could to make sure one of them heard. I want you to understand that I did not, at that moment, think Orn was foolish. Orn was a Godi. He was doing what a Godi is meant to do, and he was doing it well. And if you had asked me at that hour whether a ram tied to a post at the northern gate would keep the settlement safe, I would have said yes, because I did not have any better idea. and because I had lived my whole life in a world in which such offerings had, more or less, worked. I want you to understand that because it is important that you understand I was not smarter than the rest of them. I was only a woman with less to lose and less to defend, and therefore a slightly clearer eye. The ram bleated once, and then it stopped. Orn came back inside. The northern gate was barred. The watch was set 2 men, doubled, at the tower above the gate. Everyone went to their beds. At first light, Sven went out to check the ram. The ram was gone. The rope was still tied to the post. Sven came into the longhouse with the rope in his hand, and he laid it on the table in front of Hrafnkell without a word. And Hrafnkell picked it up and looked at the end of it. The rope had not been cut. The rope had not been chewed. The rope had not been broken. The rope had been untied. The knot Orn had used the night before was a double half-hitch. It is a knot a shepherd learns as a boy. It is a knot that does not come undone by an animal pulling at it. An animal pulling at it only tightens it. To undo a double half-hitch, you have to lift the working end back through the loop, in the reverse of the order it was put in. The rope on the table in front of Hrafnkell had been undone in the reverse of the order it had been put in. Hrafnkell held the rope for a long time. He did not speak. Orn stood beside him and did not speak. The other men in the hall did not speak. I stood in the doorway of the loom room with a cup of water in my hand that I had come out to drink, and I did not drink it. Then Hrafnkell said, quietly, "A man did this." Orn said, "No man came through the gate. The watch was set." Hrafnkell said, "Then a man came over the wall." Orn said, "The wall is 9 feet high. There would be tracks against the base. There are none. I have looked already this morning, before Sven came in." Hrafnkell said nothing. Orn said, "It is not a man." And Hrafnkell, who was not a man who liked to be corrected, but who was also not a man who lied to himself when a lie would kill him, Hrafnkell said, slowly looking at the rope, "Then what is it, priest?" And Orn, for the first time in the 4 years I had known him, did not have an answer. He stood at the table with the rope in his hand, and he looked at the knot, and he did not speak. I set the cup of water down on the shelf beside the loom room door, and I went back to my loom, and I did not weave for the rest of that day. I sat with my hands on the frame, and I looked at the wall, and I thought about the Sámi guide 4 years ago at the base of the red stone. And I thought about the word he had said once and not twice. And I thought for the first time that we might be about to find out what the word had meant. I was right. But I was 3 days early. Orn made a second offering on the 4th night. He did not consult Hrafnkell about it. He simply announced, at the evening meal, that Freyr had rejected the ram. The rope untied was a sign, he said, of rejection, not of theft, and that a larger offering was needed. He said this with the confidence of a man who had spent the day recovering from being unable to answer his Jarl's question, and who had spent that day building a framework inside which he would not have to be unable to answer it again. I want to be fair to Orn. He was not stupid. He was not vain in the ordinary way. Vain men are vain. He was a man whose whole life had been built on the premise that there was a specific set of rites for a specific set of problems, and that if you performed the correct rite, you got the correct outcome, and that when you did not get the correct outcome, it was because you had performed the wrong rite. Inside that framework, the untied rope was a message from Freyr. Not this offering, a larger one. Inside that framework, there was no room for the possibility that the framework itself was wrong. I do not think most people are able to step outside the framework they were raised inside. I do not think I would have been able to if I had not already lost everything the framework was supposed to protect. It is easy to see a wall clearly when you are no longer standing behind it. The second offering was a goat. A young one, from Gita's flock. She gave it herself, in front of the men, which was a generous thing and a politically shrewd thing, because it silenced anyone who might have grumbled that the priest was taking too much. The goat was tied to the same post, in the same knot, at dusk on the fourth night. This time Orn drove a second wooden peg into the ground, beside the post a smaller peg, waist high, with a strip of red cloth tied to it. He said the peg was a marker for Freyr, so the god would know the offering had been made properly. He said this to the men in the hall, and the men nodded. And I sat at the loom, and I heard the sound of a man building a second wall behind the first one, because the first one had failed. At first light, the goat was gone. The rope was untied, the same double half-hitch, undone in the reverse of the order it had been put in. The wooden peg was still standing. I want you to hold that image in your mind for a moment, because it is the moment I want you to understand what we were dealing with, if any of us had been willing to see it. The peg was waist high, a strip of red cloth on it. A goat had been tied to a post one pace from the peg, and the goat was gone, and there were no drag marks, no blood, no tracks in the snow around the post and the peg, which was small enough that a man walking past in the dark could have knocked it over without noticing, was still standing, straight up, perfectly. The cloth on it was not disturbed. Whatever had taken the goat had worked around the peg, had noticed it, had moved carefully enough not to touch it. Orn said, when he saw the peg, "Freyr accepts." Hrafnkel said nothing. He had stopped saying things in the presence of Orn that could later be quoted back to him. But I saw his face from across the courtyard, and I saw that he had understood the peg the same way I had, and I saw that he had also chosen not to say so. The third offering was a calf. I will not describe the invocation. It was longer than the ram's. It involved cutting a small piece of the calf's ear before it was tied to the post, a pledge, Orn said, a first taste. And he took the piece of ear and burned it in a copper bowl at the northern gate. And the smoke went straight up, which he said was a good sign. And I stood at the loom room door and I watched him, and I thought, he is going to keep doing this until there is nothing left to tie to the post. The calf went the same way, rope untied, peg standing. This time there was a second peg, and a third. Orn had made a small ring of them around the post, each with a strip of cloth, each a marker for a different name of Freyr, and all of them were undisturbed in the morning. The calf, though, was a larger animal. It had struggled. There were hoof prints in the snow around the post. The hoof prints were the calf's own, and they showed where it had turned and kicked and pulled at the rope in the night. But there were no other tracks around it. Nothing had approached the post from any direction. There was no sign that anything had come near the calf at all. And yet the calf was gone. I went out that morning, while the men were still standing around the post arguing. And I walked to the calf's pen, the pen the calf had been in the previous day, before Orn had let it out. And I looked at the pen door. The pen door was open. Not broken, not forced, open. The latch was in the up position. The wooden pin that held the latch closed at night, and a pin I had watched Svein set myself 2 days earlier, when the pens had been reorganized after the ram. The pin was lying on the ground beside the post. Not thrown, not snapped, placed. I bent down, and I picked it up. I put it back in the latch. I closed the door. Then I stood there for a long minute, and I felt a coldness go through me that was not the cold of the morning. Because the cold of the morning I had grown used to in 4 winters, and this was a colder thing. Something had come to the pen the night before. Something had opened the latch. Something had lifted the pin and set it down on the snow. Something had... I understood this suddenly. And with the certainty of a thing that had been true for some hours before I noticed it, something had led the calf out, or let the calf out, or invited the calf out. And the calf had walked freely to the post at the northern gate where Orn had tied it and had been taken from there. The rope was not the barrier. The rope had never been the barrier. The rope was a small human ritual that Orn had performed for his own reasons, and the thing on the mountain had humored it, untying it each time, because that was what the ritual required. Because to break the rope would have been to disrespect the shape of what we were doing, and whatever was on the mountain was not disrespecting the shape of what we were doing. It was taking part. It was, in some way I could not yet name, cooperating. I stood in the pen doorway with the pin back in the latch, and I understood, for the first time, that we were not being attacked. We were being engaged with. By something that understood doors, understood knots, understood the specific order in which a man had tied a rope, and how to undo it in the reverse of that order. Understood the difference between a post and a peg, and knew not to knock the peg over. Understood, perhaps, more of what Orn was doing than Orn did. I did not go back to tell Hrafnkel. I did not tell Orn. I went back to the loom room, and I sat down, and I wove for 4 hours without stopping, because I did not know what else to do with what I had just understood, and my hands needed something to do. That afternoon, Orn announced, at the meal, that the offerings were working. The tracks had stopped. He said no new tracks had been found north of the palisade for 2 days. Freyr, he said, was accepting. The pattern was clear. We would continue, he said, larger offerings, every night if necessary. Until the winter turned, and the mountains slept, and the danger passed. Hrafnkel listened. He did not agree. He did not disagree. He ate his bread. That night, Orn sent a young thrall named Odin to stand guard at the northern gate. Odin was 17. He had been born a thrall in Iceland, and had come to us in a trade 3 years earlier. He was a quiet boy, small for his age, and he had the kind of face that did not draw attention, which is a useful face for a thrall to have. Orn gave him a spear. Orn told him to stand at the post, at the same post where the ram and the goat and the calf had been tied, and to watch, and to shout if he saw anything, and to shout loud. And Orn would come. I do not know if Orn meant Odin as an offering. I have thought about this for 60 years. I do not think Orn knew, himself, whether he meant it as an offering. I think Orn was a man who had convinced himself that the ritual was working, and who had chosen to test the ritual by placing a human at the post, and who had chosen a human whose loss would not cost the settlement anything, because a thrall was a thrall. I do not think he told himself he was sacrificing Odin. I think he told himself he was setting a watch, but I think, in the small, quiet part of him he did not speak to, he knew what he was doing. At first light, Odin was gone. His spear was leaning against the post, upright, undisturbed. The rope on the post for Orn had tied a rope there too, symbolically, in case it was untied. The pegs around the post were standing. There was no blood. There were no tracks. Odin's cloak was folded on the ground beside the spear, folded neatly, in 3, the way a thrall folds his cloak when he sets it down in his master's house. I stood at the loom room door when they brought the cloak in. I watched Gita unfold it on the table. I watched Hrafnkel look at the folds. I watched Orn look at the folds. No one said anything for a long time. Then Orn said quietly, and I want you to hear the exact shape of what he said, because it is the moment I understood he had lost the ability to see what was in front of him. Orn said, "Friar accepts." Hrafnkel turned and walked out of the hall. I watched him go. I did not follow him. But I knew, from the shape of his back as he went through the door, that he was going to walk the palisade alone, and that when he came back, he would not know what to do, and that he would sit at the head of the table that night, and he would eat his bread, and he would say nothing, because there was nothing a Jarl could say that would not make the situation worse. That was the fourth night. On the morning of the fifth day, I put on my heaviest cloak, and I took a small parcel of dried fish and a wineskin of water, and I walked out of the settlement alone, and I went south down the river toward the mouth of the valley, because I'd remembered, at some hour of the night, that there was a Sámi camp 2 days' walk to the south along the coast, and I'd remembered that the old guide from 4 years ago had said one word at the base of a red stone, and I had understood finally that if anyone in the world knew what the word meant, it would be a Sámi elder, and that I would not survive the 6th night at Moderheimer if I did not find one. I did not tell anyone I was leaving. I did not say goodbye to Gyda, or to Hrafnkel, or to Orn. I did not know then that I would never see any of them alive again. I walked for 6 hours before I reached the mouth of the valley. The snow was knee-deep in places and waist-deep in others. And I was a woman of 46 years, and I had not walked 6 hours in a day since I was a girl on my father's farm. By the 3rd hour, I had stopped feeling my feet. By the 5th hour, I had stopped feeling my hands. I kept walking because stopping is a decision, and I had not, at that point in my life, made many decisions of my own. And I did not want the first one I made in years to be the decision to lie down in the snow and die. I reached the red stone at the base of the old pine an hour after midday. I stopped there. I put my 2 fingers on the stone the way the old guide had 4 years earlier. I did not know why I did this. I did it because he had, and because I had learned in the intervening days that the small gestures other people make when they touch a place are sometimes the only maps we have of what the place is. The stone was warm. I want you to understand what I mean by that. It was not warm the way a stone in the sun is warm. There was no sun. It was the middle of a winter afternoon in the north, and the light was the flat gray light that has no heat in it. And every other stone I had passed on the walk down was cold enough to burn my hand through the mitten. This stone was not. I stood with my 2 fingers on it for a long time. Then I took my hand away, and I kept walking. I found the Sámi camp 2 hours later, in a hollow of birch a mile down the coast from the mouth of the valley. There were 4 lavu, the conical tents the Sámi use, and a low fire, and a woman sitting outside the largest tent scraping a hide with a curved knife. She looked up when I came out of the trees. She did not look surprised to see me. She did not look pleased either. She looked the way a woman looks when a thing she has been waiting for has finally arrived, and she is not sure whether she wanted it to. She was old, older than I had expected. Her face had been carved by the same wind as the guide's 4 years ago, but into more lines and deeper ones, and she had eyes that had gone that pale gray which very old eyes sometimes go, as if the color has been slowly used up by looking. She wore a coat of reindeer skin and a hat of the same, and she had a small bone knife on a thong around her neck, and she was, without question, the person I had come to find. I did not speak Sámi. She did not speak Norse well, though as it turned out, she spoke it better than I had feared, in the slow, careful way of a person who has learned a language once and not used it in many years. I stood in front of her fire, and I said in Norse, "I am from the settlement in the valley. I need help." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said in Norse, "You came late. Your husband should have brought you sooner." I did not know how to answer this. I said, "My husband is dead." She said, "I know, I'm sorry." She said this without pity and without warmth, and without any of the small performances people put around the phrase when they say it. She said it the way you would say the river is frozen, a statement of fact delivered as courtesy. She said her name was Isla. She said I should come inside because I was going to lose 2 fingers if I did not. And she had things to say that would take longer than I could stand outside for. Inside, the lavvu was warmer than any building I had been in that winter. She sat me down by the small central fire, and she took my mittens off, and she looked at my hands, and she made a low sound in her throat that was not approval, but was not despair either, a sound of accepting what she had been given to work with. She rubbed my hands between hers for a long time. She poured hot water over them from a small copper pot. She did not speak while she did this. When she was finished, she wrapped my hands in a piece of dry wool, and she sat back on her heels, and she looked at me. She said, "Tell me what has happened at the settlement." I told her. I told her about the dogs and the ram and the goat and the calf and the untied ropes and the standing pegs. I told her about Odin's folded cloak. I told her about the pen door with the pin placed on the snow. I told her about Orn, and about what he had been saying to the men, and about Hrafinkel, and about Hrafinkel's silence. I told her about Gunnar the hunter's sentence, spoken to no one at the hearth. They did not stop walking. They stopped needing to. I told her about the tracks that ended in the meadow, and about the way the 4th day had felt different from the 3rd, and the 5th different from the 4th. I did not tell her about the warm stone at the mouth of the valley, because I had not yet figured out how to say it. But I think she knew. She listened without interrupting. She had a way of listening that I have not encountered often in a life of listening to other people. She did not nod. She did not lean forward. She did not make the small, encouraging sounds most people make to keep a speaker going. She simply looked at me and let the silence do the work. And I found that I could say things to her that I would not have known how to say to anyone else. And that when I ran out of things, I did not need to invent more, because she was not waiting for more. She was waiting for me to finish. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "The word the old man said to your Jarl at the Red Stone, do you remember it?" I said, "Itnu." She flinched. That is not the right word for what she did. She did not move much. But something in her face gathered inward, the way a fire gathers inward when the draft closes, and she said quietly and quickly, "Do not say it again. Not in this hour." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because it is a word that names a thing, and the naming is a small door, and the door should not be opened twice in the same air. It will not matter here, this far from the mountain. But the habit is important. You must not say it twice." I said more quietly, "What does it name?" Ile looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "It is not what your scholars will one day say it means. The scholars will say it means river, or great river, or mother river, and they will think that is enough. It is not enough. The word is older than river. The word is what the mountain dreams. Do you understand?" I said, "No." She said, "The mountain sleeps. When it sleeps well, we do not see what it dreams. When it sleeps badly, the dreams come down. That is what your settlement has been living with. Not a beast, not an animal. A dream that has come part way down the mountain because the mountain is no longer sleeping well. I said, "What have we done to wake it?" She said, "Your fires, your walls, your ropes and your pegs and your priest's voice at the northern gate. The mountain has been sleeping under these hills since before my grandmother's grandmother was a child. It has slept through Sámi camps and hunting parties and reindeer migrations, because we know how to be quiet on the surface of a sleeping thing. Your people do not know this. Your people build. Your people burn. Your people offer. And the offering is a voice, and the voice reaches down into the sleep." I sat with this for a long time. Then I said, "Can it be sent back to sleep?" She said, "I do not know. I have not seen a mountain wake in my lifetime. My grandmother saw one when she was a girl, in the country east of here. She told me what she saw, and she told me what her people did, and what they did was to leave. They walked. They walked for 2 months. They did not go back for 3 generations. When they went back, the mountain was sleeping again. That is all I know." I said, "It has been 5 nights. My people will not leave in time. My jarl will not order it. And my priest is telling them the offerings are working." Ale nodded slowly. She said, "Yes, I thought that would be true." She stood up then. She went to a small wooden chest at the back of the lavvu, and she opened it, and she took out something wrapped in a piece of undyed wool. She sat back down in front of me. She unwrapped it. It was a piece of bone, carved, about the length of my forearm from wrist to elbow. It was the color of old ivory, worn to a soft gloss along the length of it where hands had held it. And there were markings on it that were not runes and were not any writing I knew. It was smooth. It was, in a way I cannot properly describe, comfortable, the way a well-used tool is comfortable, a thing that had been held for so long by so many hands that it had learned the shape of a hand, and now offered itself to any hand that came to it. She held it out to me. She said, "This is for you." I said, "What is it?" She said, "It is not a charm. It does not have power. It is a marker. It says, to the one who carries it, that the one who carries it is not part of the noise, not part of the walls, not part of the fires, not part of the offering." Do you understand what I'm saying? I said, "No, not fully." She said, "The dream does not see the marker. The dream sees only noise and fire and walls. The marker is not for the dream. It is for you. When you hold it, you know that you are not part of what the dream has come down for. That knowing is what saves you, not the object, the knowing. Do you understand now?" I said slowly, "The object teaches me how to be not part of." She said, "Yes." She placed it in my hand. It was warm, not warm the way the stone had been warm, a different warmth. The warmth of a thing that has been held recently, though she had taken it from a wooden chest, and no one had touched it since she opened the box. I did not ask about the warmth. I had begun to understand, in that hour, that there were kinds of warmth in the world I did not have words for, and that asking about them was one of the noises Eile had told me not to make. I said, "How long have you had this?" She said, "It is not mine. I have been holding it. Someone before me held it. Someone before her held it. I do not know how many. It is older than the lavvu I was born in." I said, "Who gives it to whom?" She said, "Whoever needs to carry it next." I said, "How do you know when that is?" She said, "You came to me." I sat with the bone in my hand for a long time. Then I said, because I had to ask, Why me? I am Norse. I am from the settlement that woke the mountain. Why not one of your own? Isle said in a voice that was very tired. Because if the mountain wakes fully, the settlement will be gone. Your people will die, or they will run. And either way, they will not carry this. And someone must carry it. And the last time a mountain woke, 3 generations of my people did not go home. I do not want my granddaughter to be the one who has to hold this on the night her lavu is inside the dream. So I'm giving it to you. Because you came. Because you can carry it out. Because you have already lost everything that would make you fight to stay. She looked at me steadily. She said, "This is not a kindness. I am not saving you. I am asking you to do a thing that will cost you the rest of your life. You will carry this, and you will not know why, most days. And you will not tell anyone what it is, because there is no one to tell who will understand. And one day, when you are as old as I am, someone will come to you the way you came to me, and you will give it to them, and you will not know their name either. Do you understand what I'm asking?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Then take it. Go. It is late. You must be back before the 6th night. The 6th night is when the dream comes fully down. Your people cannot be saved. But you can walk out of the settlement carrying this, and the dream will not see you. That is all I can give you. It is all any of us have been able to give for a long time." I stood up. My hands worked again. My feet worked. I did not know how the warmth had come back into them, and I did not ask. She walked me to the edge of the birch. She did not say goodbye. She said at the last, "The word. Do not say it again in this valley. Do not say it in the settlement. Do not say it when the dream is near. You will want to. Do not." I did not say it. I nodded, and I turned north, and I began the walk back up the river toward the settlement, and I did not look behind me, and I did not stop. I walked through the rest of the afternoon and into the dusk, and then into the dark. The bone was in the pocket of my coat, against my ribs, and I could feel it there the way you feel a heartbeat that is not your own. The moon rose. The wind died. The country went very quiet in the way country goes quiet when something large is moving somewhere in it, and every small living thing knows. At the 6th hour of the 6th night, I came around the last bend in the river, and I saw Motorheimer in the distance. The northern palisade was already burning. I want to tell you what I saw from a mile out, because the distance mattered. The palisade was burning in 3 places along the northern wall. Not all along it, 3 specific fires, spaced along its length like beacons. I did not understand yet that this was because 3 specific sections of the wall had been broken, and the fires were the settlement's own torches thrown into the breaches to give light to the men defending them. I would understand this in the next quarter of an hour. From a mile out, I only saw the fires, and I saw that the longhouse was not yet burning, and I saw that the smokehouse was not yet burning, and I understood that the settlement was still standing and still fighting. And I began to run. I was a woman of 46 who had already walked 12 hours that day, and I ran the last mile in snow to my knees. I do not know how. I have never done anything like it since. I do not think it was courage. I think it was the specific animal fact that my loom was still in that settlement, and Gita was in that settlement, and Baynir the 6-year-old was in that settlement. And I had been away from them for a day and a night while they had needed me. And my body was going to reach them, or it was going to break in the trying. I came in through the southern gate. The southern gate was unguarded. There was no one on the wall on the southern side, because everyone who could hold a spear had been called north. The courtyard was already ruined. I want to be careful how I say this, because the words we have for ruined places are not adequate. The courtyard was not on fire. The buildings around it were not yet on fire. But there were bodies in it. 3 that I could see in the first moment, 2 men and a woman, near the well, in postures that did not make sense as human postures. I did not stop to look at them. I do not know to this day who they were. I have lived with that not knowing. I ran to the longhouse. The door was closed. I pushed it open and I went inside. Inside, it was almost normal. That is the thing I don't want you to understand. The longhouse was warm. The fire was still burning in the hearth. Gyda was sitting on the bench by the hearth with Beinir in her lap. 2 other women were on the far bench, Sigridur, the smith's wife, and Ragnhildur, the miller's widow. A boy of 9, Steinar, was crouched by the door with a small knife in his hand, as if to guard it, though the knife was a kitchen knife and would have done nothing against anything larger than a hare. They looked up when I came in. Gyda's face changed when she saw me. Not with joy, she did not have room in her for joy at that moment, but with a small, specific relief. The relief of a person who has been counting the people they can still name and has just been able to add one back. She said, "You came back." I said, "What is happening?" She said, "It came at dusk, through the north wall. Orn went out. Hrafnkel has the men at the breach. It has not come inside yet. They are holding it." I said, "Where is Orn?" Gyda did not answer. Sigridur, on the far bench, said in a voice that was not quite her own, "Orn is gone." I said, "Gone." Sigridur said, "He went out to meet it. He said he would meet it as a Godi meets a god. He walked out through the northern gate. We heard him. We heard him for a long time. Then we did not hear him." I said, "When?" She said, 2 hours ago." I sat down on the bench next to Gyda. I could not think for a moment. I put my hand in my pocket and I touched the bone through the wool of my coat, and the bone was warm, and my hand steadied. I said, "Tell me what you heard." Sigrid told me. Ragnhildur filled in what Sigridur had not seen. Between them I was able to piece it together, though I want to warn you that the piecing is imperfect, because the 3 women in that hall had each seen a piece of Orn's death, and none had seen the whole, and the pieces did not fit together into a shape I have ever been able to see clearly in my head. Orn had gone out through the northern gate at the 6th hour of the 6th day dusk. He had worn his ceremonial cloak, and he had carried an unblooded sword, and around his neck he had worn a torque of Irish gold that had been in his family since before the settlement, which he had not previously worn in the 4 years I had known him. He had walked out alone. The men at the northern gate had not been told to follow him. He had climbed the low ridge north of the palisade in full view of the settlement, and he had stood on the ridge, and he had raised his arms, and he had shouted an invocation. Sigridur said the invocation was in the old style, and it was long, and she could hear the shape of it from the hall, though not the words. Ragnhildur said the invocation ended with a specific silence, that Orn had stopped speaking suddenly, in the middle of a phrase, and had not started again, and that the silence had lasted long enough for her to count to 90. Then, Sigridur said, the ridge had moved. That is how she said it. The ridge moved. She meant, I think, that something the size of the ridge had risen up from behind it, or from within it, or through it. She was not able to be more specific than this. She said the ridge had become taller. She said Orn had become smaller. Ragnhildur said Orn was taken upward. She said one moment he was standing with his arms raised, and the next moment he was no longer standing anywhere at all. And there was a shape on the ridge that had not been on the ridge before. and the shape was she could not describe it. And she stopped trying. And Orn's voice had come from inside the shape for perhaps 3 heartbeats. And then it had not. Steinar, the 9-year-old boy by the door, said Orn had been swallowed. I do not know which of them was right. I do not know if any of them were right. I have lived 60 years with 3 descriptions of Orn's death. And I have never been able to reconcile them, and I have come to think that they cannot be reconciled, that what happened to Orn on the ridge was a shape human eyes could not properly hold. And each of the 3 women in the hall had reached for the nearest human word, and the words did not agree because the thing did not fit inside any of them. After Orn was gone, however he was gone, the thing had come down the ridge. It had come down slowly. Not slowly the way a hunting animal comes down slowly. Slowly the way weather comes down slowly. Sigurdur said it had come with its own quiet, that all the wind had stopped when it came, and all the fire in the settlement had begun to burn straighter, and the sound of the men at the gate had gone very small, as if she were hearing them from underwater. It had reached the northern palisade at the 8th hour. It had broken through in the first place at the 8th hour and a quarter. It had broken through in 2 more places by the 9th. The men, 20 of them, 22 at most, had formed a shield wall in the courtyard, and Hrafnkel was at the center of the shield wall. And they were holding. They were not holding well, but they were holding. I sat on the bench with Gita, and I listened to all of this, and I felt the bone in my pocket, and I felt something in me settle in a way I did not fully understand at the time, and have only partly come to understand since. I stood up. Gita said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I want to see it." Gita said, "You cannot. It will kill you." I said, "It will not." I do not know how I said this. I do not know where the certainty came from. I want to be careful in the telling, not to make myself sound braver than I was. I was not brave. I have never been brave. I was a woman of 46 with a piece of bone in her pocket and a settlement full of people I loved dying around her. And I did not go out into the courtyard because I had faith or because I had courage. I went out because I had understood in that hour that everything inside the longhouse was going to burn, and that the last 4 years of my life were in that loom room behind the partition. And I did not want to be inside when the roof came down. And I did not want to be outside if there was nothing outside worth being outside for. I wanted to see it. That is the only true way I can put it. I wanted to see it because I had walked 6 hours south and 6 hours north, and I had held a Sámi elder's hand, and I had learned a word I could not say twice. And I wanted to see what all of it had been about. I put my hand on Gita's shoulder. I said, "Stay here, keep the fire burning. If the roof begins to catch, go out the smokehouse door. Do not go north." She looked at me for a long time. She did not argue. I think she understood in her own way that I was not going out to fight, that I was going out for a reason she did not have a name for, and that the reason was mine. I went to the door. Steinar looked up at me. I said to him, "You are the man of this hall until I come back. Do you understand?" He nodded. I opened the door, and I went out into the courtyard, and I walked north toward the shield wall, and I did not run. The shield wall was 30 paces from the longhouse door. Hrafnkel was at the center, as Sigurdur had said. He had his round shield up and his axe in his right hand. And he was shouting orders in the short, flat voice a man uses when he has been shouting for an hour and has learned to conserve his breath. There were, I counted later, 23 men in the line. Some of them were wounded. One of them, I could see this from 10 paces behind, was standing upright by the pressure of the men on either side of him, and I do not know if he was still alive. Behind the shield wall, the northern palisade was burning in 3 places. The fires threw a light across the courtyard that made every shadow move, and the shadows did not move together. Some moved with the wind, and some moved with the fires, and some moved with a third thing that was on the other side of the wall and coming through. I could see it then, through the largest breach, framed by burning wood. I want to try to describe it, though I have failed at this many times. It was standing outside the palisade. The palisade was 9 feet high. Its head was above the top of the palisade, by half its own height again. The head was the head of a bear. That was the first thing my eye reached for. That was the nearest human word. But the bear was too large, and the fur was too matted, and the eyes were the wrong color. And the mouth was open, and the teeth inside the mouth were not the teeth of a bear or of any animal I had ever seen. I want to be honest with you. I looked at the mouth for perhaps 2 heartbeats, and then I looked away, because the mouth was the thing I could least fit inside my head. And my head had been through enough that day. And I preserved myself in that small way by not looking at the mouth again. The eyes I looked at. The eyes were amber, not the amber of jewelry. The amber of a lamp seen through a horn window, a lit thing seen through a barrier. They were lit from behind. Whatever was behind them was not what I would call thought. It was not what I would call feeling. It was the light that is behind those things, before they exist. Do you understand? Or do you not yet? I did not understand in that moment. I have come to understand it since, and I still cannot say it clearly, so I will not press it further. Its shoulders were above the palisade. Its arms, I will call them arms, were coming through the breach, and the breach was widening as it came, the pine of the wall snapping and splintering and falling in on the men. Raffenkel was shouting. I did not hear what he was shouting. I heard his voice, but the words did not come apart into meaning. I have wondered since whether this was because the thing at the wall was so large that it displaced human meaning by its presence, the way a stone in a river displaces water. And everything within a certain radius of it became sound without shape. I do not know if this is a real thing. I think it is a real thing. I walked up behind the shield wall. I did not think about walking. I put one foot in front of the other. My hand was in my pocket, around the bone. The bone was warm. It was warmer than my hand. I want to tell you something about the men in the shield wall. They did not see me. I do not mean they were focused on the thing at the wall and had no attention for what was behind them. I mean, I walked up to within 1 pace of the back of the line, and I stood there for the span of a breath, and not one of them turned. Their eyes were forward. Their spears were braced. The men on the outer edges of the line were the ones who would have noticed a movement behind. They were trained to notice, and they did not notice me. Their heads did not turn. I think now that they could not have seen me if they had tried to. I do not know if this was the bone, or if it was because their attention was fully consumed by the thing in front of them, or if it was because, and this is what I have come to believe I was, in that moment, becoming the specific kind of not part of that he had said the marker made a person into. I do not know which of these is true. Perhaps all of them. Perhaps none of them mattered. Perhaps I would have walked through them either way. I stepped between 2 of them. There was a small gap between the shield of Ketil the smith and the shield of Bergthor the plowman. Ketil was on my left and Bergthor on my right. I turned my body sideways to fit through the gap. Ketil's shoulder brushed my arm as I passed. He did not react. Bergthor's spear shaft was against my hip. He did not adjust. I came out the other side of the shield wall. I was in the open snow of the northern courtyard, between the line and the breach. The fires from the burning palisade were on either side of me. The light was orange and moving. The ground under my feet was churned into slush and blood. The blood was not fresh. It was the blood of what had already happened at the wall in the hour before I arrived. I walked forward. I walked into the open. Not because I meant to, because there was nowhere else to walk, because I had already come this far. The thing at the wall saw me. I felt it see me before I could confirm it with my eyes. The way you feel a large animal in the dark before you see it, the specific pressure of an attention arriving on you. I raised my head. It had lowered its own. Its face was 15 feet from mine. The amber eyes were on me. The mouth was closed. I was grateful, then and now, that the mouth was closed. We looked at each other. I do not know how long. I counted 6 heartbeats later, when I was trying to remember. I have counted 6 heartbeats 1,000 times since. Sometimes, when I'm lying awake in the very early morning, before the light comes, I count 6 heartbeats to remember what 6 of them felt like on that night. And I never get the count right, because the 6 on that night were slow, and the 6 in my bed are fast, and the 2 kinds of heartbeat are not the same instrument. I did not raise the bone. I did not show it. I did not lift my hands from my sides. I stood in the snow with my hand in my pocket, and I looked up, and it looked down. And my culture, my whole culture, the entire cosmology I'd been given as a girl, and had lived inside for 46 years, became small around me, in that moment, in a way I want to describe carefully. I did not stop believing in Odin. I did not stop believing in Thor. That is the wrong description. I understood, standing there, that Odin and Thor were the specific shapes my people had built to cover the space this thing occupied. That our gods were not lies. They were shields the size of a man, held up against a thing the size of a mountain. And the shields had worked for as long as we had stayed inside our halls and did not look up. I understood that the whole of what we called religion was a work of architecture built with our backs to something we could not have survived facing directly, and that the architecture was beautiful and useful, and that I had loved it, and that I was standing outside it now, and that I could not go back in. That is not a horror I know how to describe. I have tried. It is not the horror of the thing itself. The thing itself was not, in that moment, trying to horrify me. The horror was the specific loss of the roof over my head that had been there since I was a child. The roof was gone, and above the roof there was this, and this was what had always been above the roof. And everyone I had ever known had lived and died without knowing that the roof was a roof. I want to say also, because it is true, it was beautiful. I do not know if you will accept this. I have not said it aloud, ever, in 60 years. But it was beautiful. Not the way a woman is beautiful, or a hall in firelight is beautiful, or a boat on a summer sea is beautiful. It was beautiful the way weather is beautiful when you are alone on a headland, and the storm is coming, and you know you will not survive it. It was beautiful the way the truth is beautiful when you have not seen it before. The 6 heartbeats ended. The thing moved. I want you to hear how it moved, because this is the thing I have most wanted to give someone before I died. It did not attack me. It did not spare me. It did not acknowledge me. It moved forward, and its foot came down in the snow 1 pace to my left, and its other foot came down in the snow 1 pace to my right, and its body passed over me, and its shoulder came down and around, and it walked past me into the settlement, the way a man walks past a stone in a field. The stone is not in his way. He does not crush it, because to crush it would be a small effort he has no reason to make. He walks around it, without noticing that he is walking around it, because the walking around is automatic in a body his size. I was the stone. I was not chosen. I was not spared. I was not seen, in the sense of being individually seen. I was a small, hard thing in the path of a very large thing. And the very large thing had adjusted for me the way weather adjusts for a boulder. And it had walked on. And it had gone past me into the shield wall behind me. And the shield wall, I did not turn to see this. I only heard it. The shield wall was gone in the count of 10. I heard Hrafkell shout once. I heard the specific sound a shield wall makes when it stops being a wall, which is a sound I hope you never hear. I did not turn around. I stood in the snow with my hand in my pocket, and I looked at the breach in the wall where the thing had come from, and I looked at the mountain beyond it, and I waited. The thing left before dawn. I do not know when exactly. I did not track its passage. I heard sounds behind me, in the settlement, for perhaps an hour after it had passed me. Sounds I will not describe, because there is nothing to be gained by describing them, and because I have spent 60 years not describing them, and I'm not going to fail at that now, in the last telling. At some point the sound stopped. At some point after that, there was a long silence. At some point after the silence, I understood that the thing was gone, that it had gone back up through the breach in the palisade, and up the ridge, and up the mountain, and that the mountain was quieter now, and that I could feel the quietness of it, the way you feel the passing of a bad fever in another room. I turned around. The courtyard behind me was not on fire. That is the first thing I want to say. The palisade was still burning in patches, but the longhouse had not caught, and the smokehouse had not caught, and the byre had not caught. The fires the settlement had lit at the breach had mostly burned themselves down. There was a great deal of smoke, and the light was the gray of very early morning, and the sky in the east was beginning to pale. The shield wall was gone. I do not mean the men were dead, though they were dead. I mean the line itself was gone. The 23 men were not lying where they had stood. They were scattered across the courtyard in postures and pieces I will not describe. I walked among them. I did not look closely at any of them. I did not try to identify the individual men. I have carried the not identifying with me, along with everything else. I do not know which was Kettle and which was Bergthor and which was Hrafkell. I did not need to know, and I did not want to know, and I have gone 60 years without knowing. I walked to the longhouse door. The door was still closed. I pushed it open. Inside, the fire was still burning in the hearth. Gyda was on the bench by the hearth. Bainir was in her lap. They were both dead. I do not know how. There was no wound on either of them that I could see. I have thought, over the years, that perhaps the thing had come through the roof at some point, though the roof was intact when I entered, or that perhaps the shape of the thing's passing had displaced something in the air of the hall, the way a great weight in a river displaces the water and can drown a fish standing still. I do not know. I sat down on the bench across from them, and I looked at Gyda's face, and it was peaceful, in the way I would not have expected any face in that hall to be peaceful. And I have kept that peace with me as a small kindness offered by the world in a night that had otherwise offered none. Sigridr was not in the hall. Ragnhildur was not in the hall. Steinar, the 9-year-old, was not by the door. I walked out of the longhouse and I walked around the settlement, slowly, in the growing light. And I counted. I counted 42 dead in the first hour. I counted 5 more in the second. 47. There had been 47 of us since the 3rd summer, when Sigridur's baby had died, and no one had been born to replace it. 47. I found the living one at a time, as I said in the beginning. I found Steinar under a grain sack in the byre. He had crawled there when the thing had come through the wall. I do not know why the byre had not been touched. I have thought the byre was outside the path of the passing. The shape of the thing's walk had gone from the northern breach through the courtyard, through the shield wall, through the longhouse, and back out through the northern breach again. And the byre had been west of that line, and the smokehouse had been east of it. The path of the passing had killed everyone it had passed. Everything to either side of it had lived. I found Sigridur and Ragnhildur in the smokehouse, flat on their bellies under the smoking racks, with the venison still hanging above their faces. They came out when I called. Neither of them spoke. Sigridur's hair had gone white at the temples during the night. I did not remark on this. I do not think she knew. I found Bersi, the old man with the broken hip, sitting upright against the wall of his own hut, with his hands folded in his lap, waiting. He had not tried to hide. He had not been able to move quickly enough to hide. The thing had not come near his hut. He looked at me when I came around the corner, and he said one word. Sigrún. That was all. I nodded to him. He nodded back. Then he closed his eyes and rested his head against the wall of the hut, and I left him there and went on with the counting. The 4 of us, Steinar, Sigridur, Ragnhildur, Bersi, and myself. We sat in the courtyard at 4 different points, and we did not comfort each other. I told you this in the beginning. I want to tell you the reason now, though I did not fully understand the reason at the time. We did not comfort each other because we had not, any of us, gone through the same night. Each of us had been in a specific place, at a specific moment, when the thing had passed. Each of us had been not in the path for our own reason. The shape of my not in the path was the bone in my pocket. The shape of Steinar's was a grain sack. The shape of Sigridur's and Ragnhildur's was a smokehouse floor. The shape of Bersi's was a broken hip. We had not survived together. We had each been overlooked, for our own separate reasons. And there was no shared shape to the overlooking. There was nothing to speak of that we all had in common, because what we had in common was the specific absence of experience, the fact that the thing had not happened to us, individually, while it had happened to everyone around us. We were not survivors of the same night. We were the residue of it. There is a difference. I did not have the word for it then, but I have the word for it now. And the word is residue, and residue does not embrace itself. Residue sits where it has been left. We sat until the sun was fully up. Then Bersi said from across the courtyard, "There is nothing to burn them with." He meant the dead. He meant that the palisade wood was green, and the smokehouse wood was salt-cured, and the longhouse timber could not be spared, and there was no way to build a pyre large enough for 47, and there was no ground soft enough to bury 47 in. And there was no priest, because Orn was gone, and there was no jarl, because Hrafkul was gone, and there were no rites to say, because none of us believed in the rites anymore, in the way we would need to believe in them to say them properly over the dead. We left them where they lay. I want you to know this. I have carried it for 60 years. We left 47 people unburned and unburied in the courtyard of Modrheimer. And we walked out through the southern gate at midday, the 4 of them going south along the river toward the coast, and I went north. Sigrún asked me where I was going. It was the only thing any of the 4 survivors said to me that morning. I said, "Back to the woman who gave me this." I did not show her the bone. She did not ask what this was. She nodded. She did not try to persuade me south. I do not know what happened to her, or to Ragnhildur, or to Steinar, or to Bersi. I hope they reach the coast. I have never gone looking for any of them. The overlooking had made us into 4 separate absences, and the absences did not fit together into a group. And to have sought them out later would have been to insist on a fellowship that had not existed on the morning it might have begun. I walked 6 hours south, the same 6 hours I had walked the day before, and I came to the mouth of the valley. And I passed the red stone at the base of the old pine. And I did not touch it this time. I walked another 2 hours down the coast. And I came to the birch hollow where Aili's lavu was. And I found her sitting outside it, scraping a hide with the same curved knife. She looked up when she saw me. She did not look surprised. She did not look pleased. I stood in front of her. I took the bone out of my pocket. I held it out to her. She said, "No." I said, "It is yours. Take it back." She said, "It is not mine. I told you. It has never been mine." I was holding it. You are holding it now. You will hold it until you find the next one who needs to. I said, "How will I know?" She said, "They will come to you, as you came to me. That is how it has always worked." I said, "How long?" She said, "As long as you live. Perhaps, or a shorter time, if you are lucky." I was not lucky. I held it for 41 years. She said this without complaint, the way she said everything is fact. I stood with the bone in my hand for a long time. Then I put it back in my pocket. She stood up. She put a hand on my arm. It was the only time she touched me. She said, "I am sorry for your people. I am more sorry that you did not come sooner. I am most sorry that you came at all." I said, "Why the last?" She said, "Because you now carry a thing you cannot put down, and that is a hard life, and you are already carrying enough." She turned away from me then. She went back inside her lavu, and I stood outside it for a while, and then I walked away, south down the coast, and I did not look back. I never saw her again. I have lived here on this coast for 61 years. I raised no children. I took no husband. I kept a small croft with 3 goats and a garden. And I spun wool for the village on market days. And I traded honestly, and I paid my dues, and I attended when the community expected me to attend. I was known as Sigrún the Widow, or Sigrún the Northerner, or in the late years simply as Sigrún, because there was no one left who remembered where I had come from, and no one who cared to ask. I was asked 17 times what happened at Motorheimer. I have told you about the 17. I did not answer any of them. In the way I have answered you, I did not become a Christian. The missionaries came. They came several times. I was polite. I did not argue with them. I did not accept their God, and I did not defend my own. I have thought, over the years, that if the missionaries had understood what I had seen, what I had understood on the 6th night, in the snow, with the thing walking around me, they would have understood that they were selling me another shield. And I already knew what shields were for, and I was past the age of holding one up. I still have the bone. I want to show it to you now, because I promised I would. Here, in my hand. This is what Ali gave me. This is what I have carried for 60 years. Feel it if you want. It is warm. It has been warm since she put it in my hand. I do not know why. I do not think it is doing anything. I have come to believe, over the years. That the warmth is only the warmth of the last hand that held it, and that the warmth passes from hand to hand along the length of the years, the way a small fire is passed from hearth to hearth in a village that has forgotten how to make new fires. I do not know if this is true. It is what I have come to believe. Look at it. The markings are not runes. They are not any writing I have ever been able to identify. And I have shown it, in careful ways, to men who traded from very far away, and none of them recognized it. It is older than writing. Eiley said it was older than her lavu. I think it is older than my people. I think it is older than her people. I think it is one of the oldest things any human hand has held. I am 71 years old. My hands shake now. My eyes are not what they were. I have known for perhaps a year that someone would come to this fire before I died, and that when they came, I would give them the bone, and that I would tell them the story first so that they would know what they were being given. You came tonight. You did not ask for the story. I am giving it to you anyway, and I am giving you the bone. Take it. I do not want to hear that you refuse. Ale did not refuse. I did not refuse. The refusing is not part of the thing. Take it and put it in your pocket, and go on with the ride you were on when you stopped at my fire. And you will find, over the years, that you carry it without much thinking about it. And one day someone will come to your fire, or your bed, or your ship, and you will know them when they come, and you will give them the bone, and you will tell them what I have told you, and that will be your part. That is all I have to give you. I want to say one more thing before I close my eyes. You have listened well. You have not interrupted. You have not tried to fit what I have said into a shape that was easier to hold. I have watched your face while I spoke, and I have watched you fail to know what to do with what I was giving you. And I saw you try, once, to say something kind, a small comforting phrase. The kind of phrase a young man says to an old woman when he thinks she is nearing the end of a hard story. And I saw you stop yourself, because you understood, in that moment, that no comforting phrase belonged in the space I was making. That was well done. That was better than any of the 17 managed. That is one of the reasons I chose you. The other reason is that you came, and you did not ask, and Eiley said that is how it has always worked. I have wanted for 60 years to say one true thing about what I saw. I have failed every time I tried until tonight. I do not know if I have succeeded tonight either. But I want to try, once more, the sentence I have been holding. And I want to say it before I close my eyes. And I want you to remember it. Because it is the only true sentence I have ever said, and I would like it to survive me. I looked up at it in the snow on the 6th night, and it looked down at me, and its eye was the shape of a lamp behind a horn window, and it was lit from behind by a light that was older than my gods, and my gods were built to hide it from me. And I looked at it, and I understood for 6 heartbeats what my whole life had been built with its back to. That is the sentence. That is all I have. The bone is in your hand now. Close your fingers on it. Do not lose it. Do not show it. Do not tell anyone what it is until the one who needs it comes to your fire. I am closing my eyes now. I am not dying. I am only setting down a weight. I have carried it for 60 years, and I would like to sit for a while without it. Do not speak. Do not thank me. The thanking is not part of it either. Go when you are ready. The weather has turned. Your horse will be sound by morning. I will still be here. I will not be here for long.